47, okay, from this little book. I will no longer address a woman's infertility until she has first restored the integrity and function of her health and immune system. I'm finding an autoimmune disorder is often at the root of autism, with the immune system attacking brain or nervous tissue of the child with autism. Children born with an immune system that is attack or a ticking time bomb are vulnerable to anything that can launch a self-attack, whether it's a vaccine, a food intolerance, blood sugar imbalance, or heavy metal toxicity. When a woman goes into a pregnancy with a leaky gut, dysglycemia, okay, multiple food intolerances, and adrenal fatigue, I believe she is putting her baby at risk for developing one of the increasingly common modern health disorders, including autism spectrum disorders, eczema, asthma, food allergies, and food intolerances. Okay? So it's not, when we try to just point the finger, really what we're seeing as we look at all the research that's going on, yes, it was maybe in the case of one child, it was a vaccine. Yes, my kid had a bad reaction to this vaccine, or when they were vaccinated, they ran a high fever, and all of a sudden, their brain, that autoimmunity gets triggered. Okay? Or yes, I had all these mercury fillings, or yes, I was raised out here by Bingham Copper Mine. I just said the name, pardon me, Bingham. Out by a copper mine, and I've got all this heavy metal, right? Or I've heard, yes, I've got this leaky gut presentation, or yes, mom has all of these allergies. What we really have to look at is all of those things are indications of a triggering of this brain potential, okay? So tonight we're going to talk about autism from a brain-based model. And this is the work of Dr. Kharrizian, but we'll really talk also about the work of Dr. Mellilo. Dr. Mellilo is out of Chicago, and the guy's brilliant. You can find more of his information if you go to Professor Carrick, the Carrick Institute. carrickinstitute.edu. Or just look up Carrick Institute, just Google it. Professor Fred Carrick is where we've done our studies for neurology, and one of the instructors there for their research is Dr. Robert Mellilo. And this guy is brilliant. He has studied so much, and he's, one of the fascinating things that I find is when you look at a lot of brilliant minds, they'll actually start to show some of their own brain lesions. Like when you read his book, there are many typos. I think he thinks faster than he can even put the information down. And so, if he were to write his own name, he'd probably end up putting me, Rob, kind of a thing. He's just very, very excited and very exuberant. When he's lecturing, he's very passionate, and in his writings, it shows. Okay, so if you actually pick up one of his books, don't become overcritical about the typos and where there's this or this that doesn't quite match. Take it for the information that's there. He's a brilliant physician, and he's helping a lot of people. Okay, but Robert Mellilo, look him up on the Carrick Institute. Dr. Mellilo actually did a presentation at an autism conference recently, and in it he gave the whole presentation of this imbalance of the hemisphericities or hemispheres of the brain. And for tonight, normally when I talk to you, I'll actually mirror you and say, my right brain and my left brain actually mirror you. But tonight, based off of what we're going to look at, I'll actually refer. So you're going to have to kind of think then, am I looking at my child? If I'm looking at my child, it's their right brain, not my left brain as you, the audience. Okay? So the child's right brain is what's being affected. And that right brain effect, in essence, is slowed in its activity. We call that a right hemisphericity. The right hemisphere primarily has to do with our social interactions. And so the true definition of autism is the inability to recognize a social cue. Okay? Social cue by age 18 months. That's all autism is. It's a social imbalance. Okay? The simplest thing that we look for is when you smile at the child, even at 6 months, the child should start to smile back. Right? It's a natural response for us. If one of us yawns, what do we all do? We also yawn. That's actually a social response. Okay? We think, oh, you just gave me the yawns. But it's actually a social response. When you look at someone and you smile at them, what do we do back? We smile back. Okay? The inability to recognize the social cue by the age of 18 months is then autism. And autism then is a very broad spectrum. Because you have autism spectrum disorder, meaning you have everything from this inability to recognize the smile to the child who can actually smile, ha 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 ha, but then will continue to scat or give this speech that's recorded, right? Something like, they've watched Nacho Libre again and again and again, and they're just saying, those are the Lord's chips, those are the Lord's chips, those are the Lord's chips. And they keep saying these little phrases that they hook up with. They'll get very, very focused on certain things. They'll continue to hold and have to have with them something that makes them feel or connect. You'll see that they have a real strong dislike for anything that's touching their skin, so they'll get their shoes off, okay? They won't wear stockings. They hate to wear stockings. They won't wear a waistband. The little kids will have, you'll always see they'll have a loose-fitting clothing with no tight waistbands, and they hate to have anything touching their arms or sleeves. That tactile discrepancy then also goes to foods. So they'll only like just a handful of foods. If you try to give them certain mixtures, they'll refuse that. They hate this tactile change. Okay? So if you give them certain things that they is out of their liking, they'll like chips, they'll like macaroni and cheese. But if you try to feed them something that has a different texture than that, they'll be very resistant to it. So sometimes it'll be temperature. So for example, they may hate the taste or the texture of yogurt. It just feels weird to them. But if you freeze it, they love ice cream. Okay? Or you'll say, you'll try to feed them something that would be like a healthier shake or a drink. And again, the texture makes them want to gag and they won't tolerate it. The other thing that you'll see very commonly is if you try to brush the little girl's hair or the child's hair, they hate that overstimulation. So they'll often be disheveled or be resistant to any type of stimulation, either by brushing or contact. They don't understand that. Okay? So the right brain is very much, it enjoys normally social interaction. It likes the feel. It likes to be cradled or swaddled, those types of things. When you see then this resistance, and you see the little child that runs around and hates to have the tight clothing around their waist, they'll wear just loose-fitting sweatpants, they'll resist wearing stockings, wearing slippers in the middle of the winter, or no shoes in the middle of the winter. You're looking at varying levels again of this autism spectrum. Okay, does that, everybody kind of follow that? One of the simplest things that we see very consistently is the family photo, and it's little Timmy that's smile for the camera, right? And he does this. Would you quit making faces? Smile. And he's always making these odd faces. In his mind, smile means nothing to him. Okay? His social cue when he hears smile is the same as you calling your neighbor's dog some other name than what its name is. Right? It responds to one thing, because master gives me food. You call the dog, it means nothing. Okay? The child then, he hears the phrase smile, and then by the time the family's photo portrait setting is over, he's in tears and he's always mad. We'll just Photoshop him and it's okay, don't worry about him. He was saying. Okay? So those are a couple of things that we look at for this basis. Now let's take a look at a couple of other things that we see. Do we have any questions to that point right now? So autism is primarily a right parietal slow or delay. And we look also in the right brain, in the right frontal lobe, a lack of maturation. The right frontal lobe is another condition we call attention deficit disorder. Okay? ADD, ADHD, and that's the right frontal lobe. But the right parietal lobe, and we're looking particularly in the sensory area and then into the limbic area or the emotional area of that right brain, it's an imbalance there. Okay, but the right brain is also associated with ADD, ADHD, and so we're looking at that area. The right frontal lobe is the one that multitasks. The right frontal lobe is the one that all of you women are so proud of, and that us men aren't so proud of. Okay, that's the one that Mom says, I can do so many things. Dad, why can't you focus on just one? It's so hard for me. And we don't call it ADD in us grown-ups. We call it lack of maturation of the right frontal lobe. Because ADD is only a pediatric diagnosis. Once you've passed the age of 18, Dad, you can't accept then the diagnosis of ADD anymore. It's lack of maturation of the right frontal lobe. I have lots of lack of maturation, I'm sure, so it's just not my right frontal lobe. So ADD then, we'll look at that similar area and some of the things that we'd be doing then to stimulate that right frontal lobe, okay? So if we're looking at then this parietal presentation, let me just talk about briefly some of the things that we'll see that will exacerbate or be modified in such a way that you can actually see other links into this type of a presentation. If the right brain is slowed or delayed and the left brain is very, very strong, okay, we'll say the right brain in essence is slowed or delayed in its metabolic activity. It doesn't mean the brain isn't there. So let's really establish that clearly right now. When we talk about brain imbalances in the child with autism, in the child with ADD, we're looking right brain, right hemisphere. We're not talking about anencephaly, no brain. Okay? Although when they're teenagers, sometimes that would be true. But when we're looking at this type of a brain, it's a lack of activity, and specifically what we're talking about is the metabolic activity, meaning there's not enough fuel feeding that brain. There's a lack of activation of that brain, and the frequency of firing then becomes excessive in the suppression. Remember, brain acts much like the brakes of a car. How many of you have seen a child with cerebral palsy, or a palsy or a slowing, a true slowing or lack of dedicated cells to the large brain? Have you ever seen a child with cerebral palsy? The child with cerebral palsy is the one that's in the chair and he's going like this, okay? Right? And he'll sit like this and he'll drool. And he doesn't have very good communication. He'll sit in the wheelchair like this. Sometimes he'll have leg activity, but a lot of times it's arm activity. Okay? And these uncontrolled movements are lack of big brain. Why? Because big brain is really not about firing down saying move. Big brain is all about suppressing. So the body wants to move on its own. We see the movement of body escape when we do a little reflex, right? That little reflex is a response or an activation of the body's already active motoricity. When we see then brain activity slowed, we start to see escapes of movements. Okay? So you start to see the person who has the Huntington's chorea or the Parkinsonism, and they'll have these escaping movements because the big brain no longer puts the brakes on. Does that make sense? Another example may be when you see, you've seen a snake that's been hit by a car or something, or your shovel or your whatever, and you see how it continues to writhe, okay? That's the loss of brain. That's just the escape. That motoricity is the loss of the braking system of brain. So the brain, actually the big brain, is about coordinating movement by actually suppressing escaping movements. Okay? As the infant child is developing, initially when it's trying to find its mouth, what does it do? It's all over. Okay, remember birthday 1? Happy birthday! And you always put that something in front of them, whether it be a dessert, a cake, whatever. Where does the cake end up? In the mouth?
No.
Everywhere else. Everywhere, right? Because the efficiency of big brain is not very coordinated yet, and so it doesn't suppress the escaping movement. So the child goes right to it, and it's here and all over in an attempt to find the mouth, right? And the more that it finds the pleasure of finding the mouth, we call it a plasticity or a training efficiency of that pathway, and it finds its mouth more and more quickly, so that by birthday 2, you don't have near the mass. By birthdays 3 and 4, you also observe their ability to communicate, their ability to move, their coordination is increasing physically, but also you notice their verbal cues and communication have increased also demonstrably? Yes. And also we see that it exponentially increases with their movement and their coordinated movements. Okay?